amazing. And I can't believe how many of you are still here. It's just, and I just watched you go through that Miro board. Honestly, my heart is exploding. It's this course. I just love it so much. So I built this lecture with my colleague, Rory Smith, but he's based in California. And he said, oh, I'll just get up, I'll stay up late. He's a boy. I'll stay up late till 2:30. And I said, no. I will do that cohort A. You can come and help me on cohort B. So we built the slides together, but I'm the one doing the presentation, and hopefully it will be useful. So let me share my screen. Let me just make sure that the right screen is up before I do that. You can make yourself all sorts of. Okay. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is two things. Firstly, the first half of the lecture is about free tools that you can use to basically do your reporting. If you come into country and somebody says, what's happening? How far has this tweet traveled? I'm going to give you some of those free tools that you can use. Then we're going to have a break for questions, and maybe a break depending on how tired everybody is. But then the second session is about A/B testing on social media, and how the great thing about social media is that you can very, very quickly iterate on your designs of your messages to test what might be effective or not, because we have actually very little empirical knowledge about effective messaging. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So Rory's asleep, so he's not going to do that. So it's me. So you're going to get a double whammy of Claire Wardle this morning. And we're going to start with this understanding of how do you map narratives on social media using free tools. And I'm sure that you guys know about Boolean search queries, but I just really need to emphasize again that in monitoring your social media, they are absolutely critical to how effective you can be when you're trying to find this kind of content. And we could do a whole lecture on this, but I just wanted to start off by reminding you of the power of and/or statements that you can use on different social networks to find content. And remember, these slides will be available afterwards, so don't worry too much about them. But the key elements are using language and terms that people actually use, and to think about all the different ways that they might be using them so that you can spend more time on your keywords, meaning that your results are going to be better. We're all bad on Google. We put the first keyword that we can think of and we get 33 million results, and we look at the top 3. What you need to do is spend more time on your keywords so that you get better results. And so, for example, when you use these kind of long Boolean search queries in Google, it means that you get much better results, because remember, often the things that turn up at the top of Google are things that have been around the longest. It might not be the most useful information for you. For example, a PDF very, very rarely appears on the front screen of Google. But for you, a report, something that was published 3 years ago might actually be really relevant. So how can you get at the best data for you? And things like TweetDeck, which I don't think we've spent enough time on some of these tools, but there's lots of videos and things that we can share with you. But again, if you're searching on Twitter, as we know, moves at speed. It's not always the most useful tool in every country, but it can be an incredible resource for finding just clues that might help you as you continue your journey and trying to find content. And you can use all the same long Boolean search queries in Twitter or TweetDeck. And in TweetDeck in particular, you can filter by things like verified. So you can say, I only want to see what people with blue ticks have been saying. So maybe you're in a country where you're worried about what your politicians are saying or what your celebrities are saying. This is a way to filter out all the noise and just find the people who are tweeting that you might be worried about because they've got very, very large audiences. You can filter by engagement. You're looking for things that have only really been shared very widely. So there's a lot that you can do. And again, if you want more help with any of these things, we can give you a whole host of resources to help with this. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on it, but really, this is the thing that is sometimes the most powerful training you can get, which is when you've got this very, very, very noisy social media ecosystem, how can you narrow down to the information that's relevant to you and your team? And let's talk about Facebook for a second. Actually, it can be more effective to use Google to search Facebook, because with Google, you have lots of search operators. You can, here you might be able to say that we've just said in the past week. So that's what makes Google powerful, but you can search Facebook by using Google. So for example, saying site:facebook.com, Malawi and vaccine, means that you're going to find just content on Facebook with those two keywords. And this is just a secret trick. Let's take very large websites, like for example, the WHO website, which might not have the best search functionality. I would say site:who.int and then use my keywords. It can be a really, really effective way of finding content on sites by saying site:. Just to bear in mind, you never have a space between the colon and the URL, and you never have like www. You just go straight to the facebook.com, who.com, bbc.com. This is a really, really useful hack that I'm teaching you. And again, if you're looking for things like Facebook groups, so as you probably know, Facebook groups can be places where misinformation circulates. And so trying to find groups in the area that you are can be really helpful. Again, you can say site:facebook.com/groups. And so you could do that in any country for anything. And then you put your keywords in. So here's Malawi and then in brackets, vaccine or vaccine. So again, I'm sure many of you know Boolean search queries. If you don't, we'll give you another lesson on video, but this is, again, very helpful in terms of searching within Facebook by using Google. And so here's a couple of resources if you want more on this, which is we have a guide at First Draft called News Gathering and Monitoring on the Social Web. And there's also this very good toolkit about Google Advanced Search that we've put on the right-hand side. So again, all of this will be available for you afterwards. You can also use Facebook search tools themselves. They are better than they used to be. They're still not perfect, but things like, for example, searching Malawi in groups in Facebook search will bring up groups here, and it's helpful. Oh, on the right-hand side, you can see how many posts a day. So look at this top one, Malawi Business Group, 2,500 posts a day, 80 posts a day. I mean, it's quite astonishing how much traffic there is in some groups. At the bottom, look, used cars for sale. There's a lot of people in that conversation. But the other thing you can do is that once you have a group, you can go to the search icon, the magnifying glass on the right-hand side, and you can then say, I want to search within this group for vaccines. So it allows you sometimes to find big groups where people are talking about all sorts of things and to say, are they talking about a health-related topic that is relevant to my work? Because you're often not going to have a group that says misinformation in Malawi. So you want to find big groups and then find a way to search for those conversations inside those groups. And WhatsApp. Many of you live in countries where WhatsApp is a dominant communication tool. But as you know, WhatsApp is encrypted. There is no easy way to search WhatsApp. It is not the same as Facebook or Twitter. And there are ethical questions about monitoring WhatsApp that I think we've talked about before. We need to be very aware of, if we find groups, what are we doing? Are we going into those groups and saying, hello, I'm an infodemic manager? Are we simply lurking? What are we doing with the information that we find in these groups? There's real questions about WhatsApp as a space, but we can't ignore it because it is absolutely a place where misinformation can spread. And so one thing, you might have noticed this, you're all in, well, many of you are in Elnor groups on WhatsApp, is that when you're in a group, you can go to the settings and it will give you a link that you can share with other people so that they can join that group. And if you go in and have a play around, you'll see that every group is chat.whatsapp.com/12345 whatever it is. And so what that means is that that root link, chat.whatsapp.com, is a way that you can search for people sharing those types of links. So here in Twitter, for example, Rory's created this example where you say, I'm looking for any tweets that include chat.whatsapp.com and any of these words, vax, vaccination, vaccine, vax. there's a lot of vaccine related content in this slide deck because Rory just wrote this report about vaccines. So he was like, that's all that he's thinking about. But it's useful as a teaching mechanism. But by doing that, it will show you tweets where those links exist. And so then you can join those groups and potentially see what's happening in those groups, remembering all of those ethical challenges that we just talked about. Then you can, from your desktop, it's much easier to then keep track of different groups that you want to monitor that you have joined for the purposes of this. But let's look at the top of this screen grab for a second. Do you see at the top here, all of these numbers? This is why when people say, oh, well, WhatsApp groups, they're public WhatsApp groups because people have shared the links. To me, groups that share people's telephone numbers, that's not public to me. The people that join these on WhatsApp do not think of them as public. So again, every country might have different ways of thinking about this, but it makes me very nervous if we're not careful about WhatsApp because there's numbers and there's no names in these spaces, but it makes me feel nervous. But I do believe that it's important for us to understand the types of rumors that are circulating in WhatsApp. And at First Draft, we will do this kind of work to find examples of rumors, and then we will go to Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, trying to find those rumors to see whether they have spread outside WhatsApp. We can have a conversation about this because I do think it's fascinating. And we do have a webinar that Rory ran with myself and a couple of other people, including Fabrizio Benevenuto, who's based in Brazil, who he actually scrapes, he computationally analyzes large numbers of WhatsApp groups. So the same as we've just done, but he then uses computers to automatically monitor all of those groups and to analyze those groups and to pull out the top trending photos and videos and audio messages. He's an academic, he's incredibly smart. If you're interested in WhatsApp monitoring, I recommend that you watch this webinar because we go into much more depth about those sorts of things. Okay, so how to track the spread of content. This is one of the biggest questions that people always ask. And unfortunately, a lot of tools are paid for. And you heard the other day about CrowdTangle. I just want to remind you about their browser plugin. So it's free. It tracks interactions from Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, and Instagram posts and tweets from the last 7 days. And it's a great explanatory tool that anybody in your team, you can say, just download this and have a play around with. So it's called CrowdTangle Link Checker. And how does it work? So here's a story that the AP ran, which was a very unfortunate story, unfortunately. The article was very good. The headline was pretty misleading and it got shared very widely. It was about polio in West Africa. So here's an example. So you download the plugin onto your browser. And so you then go to the URL that you're interested in. And then you click on your little browser icon and this turns up. And so here you can see the number of Facebook interactions, the number of emotion reactions, thumbs up, love hearts, smiley face. You can see how many comments and you can see how many shares. And it would also tell you underneath the top referrals. So this tells you on Facebook which Facebook groups or pages shared this based on how many followers they have. So it can be a very useful place to get an understanding of, how far is this spread? And this is particularly the case when you have high profile news stories like this one. You want to understand, well, where is this spreading? Is it only spreading in conspiracy spaces? Is it spreading in more mainstream spaces? And so you can see the top one, all the world's a stage, conspiracies. So this had got picked up by conspiracy spaces, conspiracy facts podcast, et cetera, et cetera. So from there, as I said, you can see these Facebook groups where it's being pushed the most. And then it allows you to go to those groups and show how they have talked about it. So not only do you know that they've spread it, you can click on it and see how they've written about it. So it's, again, very useful as an exploratory tool to understand how a particular topic is being framed. And then you can do the same on Twitter. It will tell you underneath any Twitter accounts that have been sharing it. And again, it ranks it by the number of people who follow them. So hopefully this is pretty self-explanatory. It really is an incredibly powerful tool. And unlike most things, it's free. So I would definitely recommend everybody downloads it if you haven't done it by now. And finally, this is a little bit more nerdy, but I know that you're all Infodemic managers now. This is something called a search engine scraper. And again, the link will be available for you. It's free. It tracks the spread of a link or keywords across the internet. You can get up to 1,000 results, and it looks at search results from a number of different search engines, including Google, Yandex, and Bing. And again, it's a great way to start your investigation, and you can kind of snowball out from there. So it's, as I said, looks a bit nerdy, but once you have it, you need it on Firefox. But once you have it, you input the URL here. So we're using the same one. And down here, it says search engine. So you can choose which search engine you want to monitor. And then here, so at the top, it says past jobs and then output at the very top. Sorry, I'm pointing on my screen, but I see you can't see where I'm pointing. But I've got this red box here. So you choose CSV under the output button. And then you get a CSV file, which basically shows where that AP article was shared across the web. So you can see Reddit, Washington Post, link to it, 4channel, BitChute, which is like a new version of YouTube, but where you see a lot of people from the far right, 4chan. So you can understand how a particular topic is spreading in different spaces. So it allows you, as I said, to kind of identify problematic communities and websites where something might be tracking. Again, you might not be doing deep investigations like this, but in your country, sometimes you might have an article, a news article like this that becomes something that gets used by a number of different communities to shape an argument in a certain way. And so it's really helpful for you to be able to understand all of that. And finally, for this section, other free analysis tools. And I'm going to put a slight warning here, is that some of these tools have been built by people who like to do things at weekends. And I'm always a little bit nervous about things like security. But I just wanted to share them with you so you can have a play around. One of them is called tweetbeaver.com. So if you're trying to do an analysis on Twitter, it shows you different top level things that you might want to do investigations around. Even things like finding common friends of 2 accounts, like bulk lookup of user account data. It can be helpful. This is another one, which is that perennial problem of who first tweeted something. So if you're doing an analysis on a hashtag, where did the hashtag start? And so this again was created by somebody, ctrlq.org, controlq.org. They basically just built this as a hobby. So again, it's not perfect. It doesn't always bring back results. But I searched this weekend for Plandemic. Remember the video from May that was this very quality production, quality, I'll use that term loosely. But actually the first time that term was used was back in 2011. Had nothing to do with vaccines. So it's interesting to kind of understand how these hashtags emerge, or sometimes they have nothing to do with the thing that you're tracking. So anyway, this is another site I wanted to tell you about. Twitonomy is free, and you have to log in using your Twitter account. But again, it allows you to do analysis. And forgive me for showing you lots of Twitter tools, but that's because there's really very few tools that you can use for Facebook or Instagram or YouTube. It's only really Twitter that has an API, which is a computational way that people can build tools on top of it. So this is, for example, doing an analysis of the Nigeria Center for Disease Control. And imagine we're scrolling down. There's all sorts of things that you can look at, who they're following, when they tweet, all the different things. And this at the end, it says hours of the day. The only reason I'm showing you this is sometimes if you're thinking that an account is a bot or automated, this is a good way to see, do they sleep? And I think, as we can see, that in Nigeria, somebody does at least sleep 4 hours a day. So that makes me think that the person who's running this Twitter account is not a bot. But I'm also worried about them because they tweet every day of the week. I hope that they're scheduling those tweets. But it's a small tool that sometimes is helpful if you're worried that something is being pushed by a bot. And the last thing I wanted to say is that there are a lot of very powerful tools out there that they're built for marketers. So it's very frustrating because they're not built for the kind of work that we do. but they can be useful for the work that we do. And you can often get a limited version of these tools. So here's an example, brand24.com. You can see at the top, it says trial version with limited data. It's not perfect, but sometimes I use these tools to I sign up for a week or whatever, or I get a trial version. It's not comprehensive, but it's better than nothing. And it helps me see if there's something there. So be very nervous about spending a lot of money on these tools. They're not actually very good for things like sentiment. So I, over the weekend, was looking at the Great Reset, which is this new conspiracy around this idea of a new world order. It's connected with vaccines. It's a real problem. And if you look at the right-hand side where it says sentiment filter, it says that it's at the moment like similar, negative or positive. It's not, it's very, very negative. But these computational programs cannot do what they're promising yet. But it can be, these tools can be useful for understanding things like traffic and reach. So I don't completely ignore them. Again, gives you a sense of some of these big accounts that you should be worried about. So I'm going to turn my screen off for a second to see if there are any questions at this point.
Yes, of course. So let me, oh, so many great questions. Okay, so there's a lot of questions about searching the WhatsApp groups related to, yeah, so you're gonna, I think you're gonna share with them the link to the Google search tool for WhatsApp monitoring. There's a lot of questions about that, about what can be done via Google and WhatsApp, but it sounds like maybe that's limited.
Well, let me just very quickly say that you used to be able to search Google in the same way. You know, I said chat.whatsapp.com, and then a few months ago, Google actually stopped indexing those links, which I think, you know, was pretty fair. I think they realized that people were using Google to access these groups, and they felt very nervous about it. So now the only way you can do it is by searching on Twitter and Facebook for those groups, because Google has stopped indexing them.
Gotcha. So let's see, what are some other things? So there's a lot of questions about, resources on creating Boolean search queries. And I actually linked to, there's a really great primer on the First Draft website on that. But I guess the question is for people who want to basically up their Boolean search game and search term game, what are some suggestions that you might have for doing that?
Yeah, it's really practice, but once you understand it, it's a little bit like mathematical equations. So if you want to extend your searches, you want to use lots of ors. If you want to close down your searches, you want to use lots of ands, because the likelihood that a post has Claire and Liz and Tina and coffee and, your numbers are getting smaller. If it's Liz or Claire or Tina or coffee, you're going to get lots more results. So the more you play around, the more you learn. The other thing is really be careful, well, not careful, think about the phrases that people use. So for example, if I'm a reporter on a breaking news desk and I'm constantly monitoring Twitter, trying to understand what news is breaking, I actually have got a Boolean search queries of lots of swear words, because when people get caught up in a breaking news event, they often swear. So I only say that you have to think about what words do people actually use, because they're not going to say, goodness, I'm involved in a fire in my house. The address is, I mean, people don't make it easy. You have to think about the words that people actually use. So think about slang words, which is why culture matters so much. If I'm trying to monitor misinformation around health in Indonesia, I could go to Google Translate, but I haven't got a clue what the actual phrases or the words are that people in Indonesia are using to discuss coronavirus. So again, you need to think about specifically the words that people use and the cultural context. And that takes time to practice. So sometimes you might create a Boolean search query and be like, why am I getting no results? And it's because it's not that there's nothing there, it's that your keywords were not really very good, and or your search string was too complicated or not complicated enough. So again, it's practice, but I love it. And I've got people on my team who are like Boolean search gurus, and they really pride themselves in being very good at it. So it's definitely practice.
Great. And more questions, of course, coming in hard and fast. So Noha asks, how can we ascertain objectivity of search tools and make sure we're not directed towards specific results?
Yeah, this is such a great, well, there's two things here. So firstly, the keywords that you choose are really important. So again, apologies for, I keep talking about vaccines, but it's because it's in my head at the moment. But for example, many people will say that that community is anti-vax. Well, people in that community say that they're actually about health freedom. So if you're only searching for anti-vax, you're going to get certain types of information, but you're not going to get posts by the people themselves who describe themselves in a different way. So objectivity is, you're absolutely right, whoever asked that question, is your search queries are only going to give you results based on what you've put in. Good data means good results, bad data, bad results. And it's the same with artificial intelligence, it's the same with algorithms. And so we, as infodemic managers, have to constantly think, what am I missing? What is it that, oh, I'm looking at Twitter because in the US, Twitter is really huge, but actually I'm meant to be monitoring in a country like Germany where Twitter use is much lower. So how do you understand what platform is the best platform? What words are the best words? Those sorts of things absolutely impact what you find. And there's no magic tool to help you with that kind of bias. It is bias. You have to be aware of what is it about the work that you do, where you live, the way you think about things that's actually impacting what you're searching for or what platforms you're using, because that will change everything.
Absolutely. And I know that guess what? Everybody's going to get links to the PDFs of Claire's presentation. We promise. We're getting a lot of questions about, oh my God, where's the link? We need this. It's great. So don't worry. We're getting it to you. I promise. So everybody can enjoy Claire's wisdom and the full PowerPoint. So there are a few questions here related to Facebook, particularly around like, can you track things that are happening on Facebook Messenger? Is there a way to monitor it? And also, what are the ethics of searching and researching public Facebook groups and their comments?
Oh my God, these questions are so good. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, Facebook Messenger is very difficult unless you, again, like WhatsApp, can find a place. But there, I don't know, maybe there is, but I don't know of a shortcut to find Messenger groups. The privacy level is actually higher, although they're owned by the same people. So if anybody does know, then please let me know. And so then with groups, I think, with groups, there are three types of Facebook groups. There are either open and you can search for them and you can find them and you can just join. There are Facebook groups where you can search for them, you can see it exists, but you have to ask to join. And the third one is they're called hidden groups, which is if you search for them, you can't find them and you can only join by somebody inviting you. And so when you think about the ethics of this, if it's a public Facebook group that you can find and anybody can join, again, you need to think through the ethics of, I would argue that that's okay to join and to lurk in. That doesn't mean that if I'm a New York Times reporter, I'm just going to report on the conversations in that Facebook group, because I would argue that people in that Facebook group, even if it's public, don't necessarily believe that what they're posting there is public. So we have to think about the difference between what is it that people think. And sometimes in groups, you have to check the community guidelines. It will say explicitly, this group is off the record. This group should not be discussed. So be aware of those types of things. But again, same with WhatsApp groups. I think it's important to be in these spaces to understand what's being said, and then try and find evidence that this might be out on a more public space. There's no hard and fast rules. Different countries have different cultures around this. There are some countries like, it's on the web, what's the problem? There are other countries that would say, no, people here don't think that it's public. So again, you have to be aware of what's happening in your own country. And I understand that there are differences, but I do worry sometimes, even in public health, there's this idea of like, well, we are tapping down on harm and therefore doing this is okay. I'm not saying not to do it, but we just constantly have to be aware of, are we crossing ethical boundaries because we're telling ourselves, well, we're ultimately doing good? And I think with technology, sometimes we can cross those boundaries too quickly without having the necessary conversations about unintended consequences of doing this type of work.
Great. Okay, I'll ask just one more question from this long, beautiful list of questions. As Sujan asks, do you recommend any good searching tools for TikTok and Instagram?
Oh, great question. We also have, we have a primer, I'm going to link to it, which is like an introduction to monitoring TikTok. And we also have a great webinar by Laura, which many of you know because she runs this cohort normally. She is our TikTok queen. And so I will post a couple of things like that. Instagram is tricky. Other than you can search on the app, you can also search Google for Instagram, but it's really a black box. There used to be really, really excellent Instagram search tools, and then Instagram really locked it down. So now there isn't. You used to be able to search by location. You could search all sorts of keywords, and now it's all gone. And probably that's a good thing for privacy, but it does make it much harder from an infodemic management perspective. But yeah, I would definitely drop in any tools. But yeah, Instagram is actually one of the most challenging to do. You can via CrowdTangle. So if you can access CrowdTangle, or you can find somebody at a UN agency that can access it. I think one of the best tools is, and in a minute, I'm going to talk about A/B testing. So you might in an organization not be able to access CrowdTangle, but the people in your organization who do marketing and fundraising, I bet they've got CrowdTangle. So the best thing is to go back to that Miro board and remember, how do you make friends with people? Oh, the best bit on that Miro board was somebody said, take gifts. I live in Switzerland and you always take chocolate. I used to live in Switzerland for a year and I could not believe how much chocolate people eat in Switzerland. So yes, make friends with the person in your organization that might have CrowdTangle access, because that's the only way really to monitor Instagram.
Really, I think infodemic management is just how to make friends and influence people.
Well, to be honest, that's the secret of life.
Exactly. All right. So back over to you for A/B testing, because I think this has been a mysterious thing that has appeared across several different lectures the last few weeks. And now people are very excited about this. So back to you, Claire.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Liz. Okay, so this is not a comprehensive lecture on A/B testing. And I think Tina has managed to convince somebody from UN Global Pulse, who are experts in this, to record a lecture that's going to be shared more widely. But I just wanted to give you kind of a sense of some of the key elements to this, which is we really have very, very, very little knowledge of what works in terms of social media messaging, both positive messaging. So which, you know, the other day, somebody collected lots of health authority examples of messages like this that try to get people to wear masks. We've got libraries of these images, but we actually don't have hardly any research on what kind of images work most effectively in social media. And on the other side of this slide, my area of specialism is debunks and tackling misinformation. Here's an example from Mythbusters from WHO. Again, we have very little knowledge about what works. Should you word it as a question? Should you do this as an image? If so, should it be a photograph, or should it be an illustration? Should it be a moving? Should it be a video? We know almost nothing. And so we're doing this work, but we're at the moment at the forefront of this kind of new field of infodemic management. And unfortunately, we know very little. And so the reason for doing this half of the lecture is to say, the good thing is that on social media, you can actually push things out very quickly and test. If I used to work in marketing and I was trying to change behavior and all I had was advertisements on the side of a bus, not only were those advertisements very, very, very expensive, by the time I tested whether they worked or not, it took a long time to get another bus. With social media, we actually have the ability to test much more quickly. So an A/B test, many of you probably know this, but it's when you're doing a test where you change only one variable and you keep everything else the same. And marketers use A/B tests to drive traffic and maximize conversions. So can you get somebody to buy something? Can you get somebody to click onto your website? In infodemic management, we want to test the effectiveness of different messages, and A/B testing gives us lots of ways that we can do that. So here's an example I pulled off the web, and I put it here just as a reminder of how much difference you can get from changing just a headline. So here's an example of two images, and they changed the language around the post. So the first one, since 1977, we've been with you on and off the field through sunrises and sunsets. We'll keep your farm running. The other version, the A/B test, was high quality products, exceptional value, quick shipping. Our values and integrity wouldn't let us have it any other way. And so then if we look at the metrics underneath, you can see that the first one did much, much, much better than the second one. I don't think that's surprising. The first one is kind of emotive, it's nostalgic. The second one is like sell, sell, sell. And so, you know, you can imagine in a marketing world, this is very interesting. But we do have to remember in the work that we do, we have to be just as aware of how the language we use, the framing we use, the images we use can make a huge difference in terms of the type of behavior change that we're trying to see. But it's much, much more difficult. Behavior change is a completely different situation than trying to get people to click on a, I don't even know what they were selling here, tractors, I think. But I just want to stress that, which is they're not the same, marketing and infodemic management. And I also wanted to say that, again, this isn't the same, but there's some interesting learnings from work that was done about over the last 10 years on countering violent extremism. There, around 2014, 2015, lots of concerns about ISIS. And because of that, there was a lot of work done to try and change people's behavior. And the reason I put this up here is because we need to find comparisons that aren't just marketing. And when you look at this, this is a research report by RAND, assessing outcomes of online campaigns countering violent extremism. What you find is exactly what we know, which is simply measuring metrics and how many impressions and how many like emojis. That doesn't mean that you're changing behavior. So I just want to caveat this whole lecture by reminding all of you that it's important to test messaging. We should be doing it. We should be iterating. But just because you get lots of people sharing your meme or GIF or graphic on Instagram doesn't mean that people are necessarily putting on a mask. So I just wanted to stress that. And it's worth reading this RAND piece. At the end, they have an appendix where they basically go through all the different campaigns, the campaign goals, the social network that was used, the reach, the engagement, and the impact. Because it's a reminder that we should be doing this kind of evaluation on all of our campaigns online. Just because it's free, essentially, to create content on social media doesn't mean that we should just be throwing spaghetti at the wall and not properly evaluating what's working and what's not. And the one amazing thing I would say about having 280 of you as this infodemic management first cohort is I really hope that as you start pushing out and experimenting with different things, you're going to be able to evaluate and then share with your colleagues in other countries, because we need this whole field of people testing, evaluating and sharing, testing, evaluating and sharing, because we have so little out there and it's critical that we know more. So key terms, this will take you back to your university days, but it's really important that when you're doing these kind of tests that you go in with a hypothesis. So what's your starting point for social media testing? What is it that you're trying to prove or disprove? And so again, you might be like, oh, Claire, I don't have to do that for an A/B test. It's really important that you stop and you spend an hour before you do this, thinking about what is it that you're actually trying to prove or disprove. Secondly, what's the variable that you're trying to change? You have to be very careful. You're controlling a variable, which is the next point, which is everything else has to stay the same and you're just changing one variable. So are you aware of what that variable is? You can't have both changing the text at the top and the image. You have to choose one or the other. You can't change the time of day and the image. You need to think of just one variable when you're doing this work. And of course, a metric is what's the metric that you're trying to test? Is it number of likes or is it actually shares? You might say, well, it's easy to like something, but I'm only really interested in the number of people that decide that this is worthwhile enough to share with other people. So is it that you want people to comment, that you're trying to increase the number of comments? Is it that you're trying to drive traffic back to your website? You're about to have a Google Analytics lecture. Is it about trying to drive traffic to your website so people download something? You need to work out what metric it is that you're interested in. And finally, and I'm going to give you some tools at the end about this, I did statistics at university, but it's definitely not my number one strength. But you need to make sure that you have got statistical significance. So you need to make sure that your test results are indeed caused by the variables that you have changed and not due to chance. And so therefore you need to develop a test that has statistical significance, and that requires a large enough sample size for a clear control. So again, just stressing all this at the top so that you're reminded of your university statistics classes. And so marketeers use these A/B tests all the time to drive traffic and maximize conversions, as they call it, and they're constantly running experiments. And we should be running the same tests. And I think sometimes in the nonprofit world, and First Draft is, we're as bad as anybody at this, is that we say, well, we don't really have the resources, and well, we're just doing social media because we can, and we do it when we can, and we just hope for the best. And really, we should be doing so many more tests to figure out what works and what doesn't. So time of day, content types, captions, copy. Should it be a question versus a statement? Images, do illustrations work better, or does photography work better? What hashtags should we be using? Should we be using emojis? If so, which emojis? Should the text be longer or shorter? You know, it used to be when Instagram first started, people were like, oh, people are here for the images, not the text. And then people learned that longer Instagram posts worked better than shorter ones. I mean, all of this is a science. We can't just go on gut instinct. It really is a science. And even though you might think, oh, whatever, social media, it's frivolous, just think about all the different things just on a video that you could test. So what's the thumbnail that comes up at the front of YouTube? What's the freeze frame? What's the title? What's the length of the video? Are you going to have subtitles or not? Are you going to have a caption? And are you going to have a call to action? So just even on a video, there's so many things that you can test. So it can feel quite daunting, but we do have to engage in these kind of questions, because I can't tell you best practice right now for health messaging on social media, because we just have such a small body of data, and that's a real problem. And so in terms of overarching variables in infodemic management, here are the kind of things that we want to be testing. Who's the most effective messenger? What's the most effective message? What's the most effective platform? And what's the most effective format? So these are the kind of things we're interested in. We're not interested in people buying t-shirts. We're not interested in conversions in that way. We're interested in behavior change. And so if you're thinking about messengers, you want to think about, well, who is the best messenger? Is it a celebrity? Is it a politician? Is it a faith leader? Or maybe it's an online influencer who actually, in the particular community that you're trying to target, maybe it's a TikTok influencer. Maybe that person is the most effective. Is it an international organization like the WHO or the CDC? Or maybe in your country, it's actually your national health authority that's more trusted and seen as a better messenger. Or is it maybe a health practitioner? Is it about having a doctor or a nurse push this message? Is it a community leader? Or actually, is it about getting peer-to-peer communication? So getting friends and family to push out these messages. So again, there's no one answer to this. It depends on the country. It depends on what message you're trying to send. And it depends on the audience. It depends on who you're trying to target. The message, what narrative technique are you going to use? What values are you attempting to tap into? So some of you might have heard of moral foundations theory. And there's this idea that tapping into core values that people have, whether that's disgust, whether it's about liberty and freedom, those kind of values can be very effective for trying to push behavior change messages. So think about what message it is that you're trying to get across and what technique you're going to use to try and get that message across. When it comes to platform, you know, online platforms, of course, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Pinterest, Reddit, YouTube, or maybe it's these closed messaging apps that we're talking about, but which one is most effective in your country? And similarly, don't forget about offline, posters, flyers, community organizers, word of mouth. So all of these different platforms you're going to need to test. And finally, format. Video, is it animation, documentary, first person, image, cartoon, photography, infographic, link, blog post, news article, research. There's so many different ways that we can do this work, and trying to figure out what's the most effective for your particular campaign with the audience you're trying to target is going to change every single time. So for example, let's take Cameroon. So here's two examples here. We've got Samuel Eto'o, who's this huge, very, very famous footballer. He's famous internationally. He's got 1.5 million followers. Is he more effective? or Dr. Manuda Malachi, who is from the Minister of Public Health in Cameroon. He's got 175,000 followers. Which of these people might be more effective? And I just mock these up. But if you're going to do A/B testing, you might go and talk to a couple of influencers to say, would you be willing to share this message? And can you share this message at this time? And then you can try and get an understanding of what might be more effective. And you might say, well, Samuel Eto'o is always going to get more engagement because he's more famous. But what you want to be measuring is all the different ways that that's being shared. So what do the comments say? And this is a little bit naughty, but I'm just going to say it now. I used to work for the UN Refugee Agency. And when I was there, Angelina Jolie was our Goodwill ambassador. And of course, she was amazing because every time she shared something on social media, we got huge engagement. But the engagement was often, I love your hair. You're so beautiful. And every time I would say, well, Angelina Jolie is reaching lots of people for us, but is she getting people to think about the refugee cause? And that was always the question for me. And so when we're thinking about celebrities, they might have lots of followers, but are they necessarily the right people to actually make behavior change happen? But that's why we need to do these tests in these ways. And so I actually took these two images, which was from a campaign from Médecins Sans Frontières, and they actually got nurses in Cameroon to talk about their experiences of wearing a mask. Now, this is a very different type of message. Again, this is something that you'd want to test. Is it more effective to have frontline workers being the people that say wear a mask than having celebrities and health professionals who aren't working in a hospital? So these are the kind of things that you want to think about. And again, we don't have good data to be able to say what is more effective, and we need so much more of it. And the last thing I'll say is about debunks. This is obviously my area of specialism. We have almost no research on the most effective ways to do debunks. We have some work on fact checking, but we have very little work on images in particular. And so even this question of, should you put a stamp on that says fake? Should you put different stamps on? We don't know enough about it. One thing I'll say is, you can see on the last one where I added misleading, is when we were doing work in Brazil in 2018 around the election, I decided, I was like, right, we're not going to use fake stamps. I think that they're very, very simplistic. I think that we should have more complex stamps, and we should say things like misleading, misattributed, imposter content. And I went through all of these details. At the end of the project, we did experiments, and it turns out that the only stamps that were effective were true or false. And it was a really important reminder for me, which is, there was me with my PhD believing that I knew best, and I didn't at all. We only know things if it's tested, if it's empirically tested and it's properly tested. And so I just remind everybody with that, which is, I can't tell you best practice, but what I can tell you is, don't make any assumptions, because I promise you that's when we make mistakes. And so very quickly, multivariate testing, which obviously is a larger scale A/B test. Instead of one variable, you're altering multiple variables at a time. It can be much trickier to analyze your data, but if you have a large audience on these social platforms, these platforms make it much easier to do these tests. And in many cases now, you can get free ad credits. So we've heard from Facebook in this course. I think you're about to hear from Google. A lot of these platforms are giving away free ad credits to nonprofits, particularly in the health space. So you now actually have the opportunity to do a lot of this multivariate analysis without having to worry that you're spending money that you don't have. So the reason that we're doing this lecture today is to be reminded that you probably will have free ad credits. So you can do this kind of work, and we want to make sure that you're aware of some of these questions. So with these ad credits, when you are able to run ad campaigns on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, you are able to target communities in ways that are actually pretty amazing. So you can target people by location, sometimes right down to their postcode or zip code. You can target by gender, education level, interests and hobbies, groups that they are members of, devices they use. But it will not surprise you to hear me say this, which is many of you obviously heard about the Cambridge Analytica scandal in 2017. This question of micro-targeting is one that we all have to be careful of. So just because we can, are we, for example, only going to target debunks to certain communities that we believe are more likely to believe in conspiracies? Is that ethical? We just have to be very aware of just because we can target, should we be targeting? And so I just put it here as a reminder that, again, in public health, there's sometimes this idea of like, well, it's okay because we're doing good. And I just want to be mindful of the fact that just because you can target people by certain demographic characteristics, we need to be very aware of that. So as I said at the top, the UN Global Pulse is this resource that many UN agencies can use, and they are experts in doing this kind of analysis, and they're going to do a lecture that will be recorded, I think in a couple of weeks' time. Tina can talk more about it. So I'm putting my hands up. I used to run social media for UNHCR, but in 2014, and things have changed quite a lot. So I said to Tina, I can't do the, like, which buttons to press, all of those sorts of things. But I did want to remind you that there is so much online that's free that will help teach you these types of things. So even if you watch that UN Global Pulse lecture, if you start searching online, it is amazing how many resources are out there. So over the weekend, I just found these resources like HubSpot, just amazing step-by-step guides on how to do all of these types of things. And even on Facebook itself, I'm just gonna have a bit of a snarky comment. This is the ugliest website I have ever seen. It's a Facebook website. It looks like a fake news website, but Facebook has really good resources on how to do these kind of tests on Facebook. This is Hootsuite is also another, I mean, many of these are created by marketing tools that want to sell their tool to you, but you can go in and take all of their free resources. And so this is how to advertise on Twitter, a 7-step guide to using Twitter ads. And this is really, I'm going to click on it now. For those of you who were nervous about statistics, this is a really research tools for testing. Look at all of these tools that they have. Significance calculator, duration calculator, how long you should run A/B tests, complete guide to A/B testing, conversion, I mean, you don't want conversion rate optimization, but there's just really great resources out there. So again, they're trying to sell something to you, but it doesn't matter, just take it. So yes, I think this is probably one of my last slides. So yes, so again, apologies that wasn't hugely hands-on, but I think I wanted to show you that there's lots of resources out there if you need to do it yourself.